My brother said I knew you'd forgive me. I smiled and replied, I have a gift for your big day. Then I opened my briefcase, proved I owned his mortgage, and ended his engagement party with foreclosure papers. 2 years ago, I walked into the home I paid for with my own blood, sweat, and endless overtime only to catch my own brother in my bed with my fiancée. That level of betrayal is enough to destroy any normal man, but the absolute psychological nightmare I was subjected to only started there. When I confronted my family about this sickening betrayal, my mother actually looked me directly in the eye, wrapped her arms around the woman who had just shattered my life and said, You have to understand, Nolan. Your brother is incredibly sensitive. They have a spiritual connection you couldn't possibly give her. In the ultimate act of humiliation, my parents literally moved my cheating ex-fiancé into his bedroom that very same day. They invited her entire family over for our traditional Thanksgiving dinner to celebrate their brand new relationship, laughing, drinking wine, and passing the mashed potatoes, while I stood there in the dining room, entirely erased from my own life. But there is one thing my family did not know. While they were busy playing happy family, taking out secret loans, and planning my brother's lavish wedding, I had quietly secured a high-level executive promotion at a major commercial real estate investment firm. And more importantly, I had just legally acquired the massive distressed debt portfolio tied directly to my parents' mortgage. They were sitting comfortably in a house that I now entirely owned, and they had absolutely no idea about the absolute hellfire that was about to rain down on them. Let us go back to the exact moment my entire reality was shattered into a million jagged pieces. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-May. I remember the weather perfectly because it was the crisp, clear spring day where you falsely believe absolutely nothing could go wrong. At the time, I was working as a senior civil engineering manager for a massive commercial construction company in Ohio. I was managing a huge bridge repair project downtown. We were supposed to pour the concrete foundation, but a catastrophic supply chain issue delayed our materials delivery. My boss, seeing that we were at a complete standstill, told me to take the rest of the afternoon off. Normally, I would have stayed at the office. I was a relentless workaholic driven by a desperate need to secure my financial future. But that day, I thought I would surprise my fiancée, Qley. Qley was completing her student teaching practicum at a local elementary school. I figured I could pick up some lunch from that little sushi place she loved, drive over, and we could spend a rare afternoon together. I had been working grueling 60-hour weeks, putting every spare dollar into a high-yield savings account to pay for our upcoming wedding. I pulled my Ford F-150 into the driveway of our house around 1:00 in the afternoon. The house was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial I had purchased just a year prior. Right away, my stomach tied itself into a strange, heavy knot. Something felt inherently off. My younger brother Julian's beat-up black Honda Civic was parked practically on my front lawn. My parents had bought him that piece of junk for his 22nd birthday, completely disregarding the fact that he had already wrecked 2 other vehicles driving under the influence. Julian was supposed to be working his part-time shift at a local electronics store. I figured maybe he was dropping off the pressure washer he had borrowed months ago. I grabbed the takeout bags, walked up the front steps, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The house was dead quiet. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But then I heard a very faint sound coming from the second floor. It was music. Specifically, it was Perfect by Ed Sheeran, the exact song Qley and I had chosen just 3 weeks prior for our first dance at our wedding reception. I set the food down on the kitchen island. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my heavy work boots making soft thuds against the floorboards. Halfway up the staircase, my hand brushed against something draped carelessly over the wooden banister. It was a navy blue silk scarf. It was the exact scarf I had bought Qley for our anniversary. 2 steps later, lying in a crumpled heap on the landing, I saw a faded vintage band t-shirt that I instantly recognized as Julian's. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Every survival instinct in my biological makeup screamed at me to turn around to walk out the front door to get back into my truck and drive far away. But I kept walking. I reached the landing, walked down the short hallway, and stood in front of the closed door of the master bedroom. I reached out, grabbed the brass doorknob, and pushed the door open. I am not going to give you the graphic, dirty details. You know exactly what I saw. What I will tell you is that they were so aggressively wrapped up in each other on the premium mattress I had purchased with my hard-earned salary that they did not even hear the heavy wooden door creak open. I stood there in the doorway for what felt like an eternity. When Julian finally noticed me standing there, the look on his face was not one of sheer terror. He simply pulled the white duvet cover up slightly, looked at me with his irritatingly calm, almost bored expression, and said, "Oh, F-C-K." Qley, however, immediately started screaming. It was not a scream of fear or remorse. It was a high-pitched theatrical wail of a woman who just realized her comfortable, fully funded free ride was officially over. She scrambled backward against the headboard, pulling the sheets tightly around her neck, repeating my name over and over again like a broken record. Julian just sat there with a disgusting smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, like he was glad the dirty little secret was finally out. I did not yell. I did not throw a single punch. The anger inside me was so absolute, so incredibly cold, that it bypassed rage and turned into a terrifying clinical silence. I turned around, walked down the stairs, walked out the front door, and went to sit in my truck. My hands were shaking so violently, I could not even put the key in the ignition. Eventually, the front door slowly opened. Julian came scurrying out like a cowardly rat. He threw his clothes on, threw himself into his beat-up car, started the sputtering engine, and sped off down the residential street. A few minutes later, Qley walked out onto the front porch, wearing her thick winter robe, tears streaming down her flushed face. I slowly opened my truck door, stepped out, and walked up the concrete pathway. I looked her dead in the eye, and I asked one single quiet question. How long? She immediately started deflecting, waving her hands in the air, talking rapidly about how things are so complicated and how human emotions are messy. How long, Qley? I asked again, cutting through her nonsense. She choked on a massive sob, looking down at her bare feet. 2 years. 2 years. My brain instantly did the devastating math. 2 years ago was exactly when I started taking double shifts to save up the $15,000 I needed for her custom diamond engagement ring. Every single Saturday I spent sweating under the brutal summer sun, pouring concrete to build a secure future she was with my brother. She actually had the utter audacity to tell me that she and Julian developed deep feelings over time. She said they shared a profound spiritual connection through underground music and abstract art that she and I simply did not possess. She told me I was always too focused on money and my career progression, and Julian understood her soul. I did not argue with her. I just pointed a finger down the street. I told her she had exactly until sunset to pack every single item she owned and get out of my house. She started crying louder, dropping to her knees, begging for a proper conversation. I turned my back on her, walked back to my truck, and drove straight to the local hardware store. I bought the most expensive heavy-duty deadbolts they had in stock. By the time I returned, her car was gone. She had left a pathetic, tear-stained, handwritten letter on the kitchen island detailing her journey of emotional self-discovery. I threw it directly into the garbage without reading past the first agonizingly dramatic paragraph. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of hypervigilance. I changed every password, secured my bank accounts, locked down my credit, and completely severed our shared phone plan. As I sat in the dark, empty living room that night, a sickening, terrifying realization washed over me. This was not just a random act of betrayal. This was the inevitable culmination of a toxic dynamic that had been brewing in my family for my entire life. To truly understand how my own flesh and blood could facilitate something so profoundly evil, you have to understand the absolute psychological nightmare of growing up in my childhood home. My mother, Evelyn, is a master manipulator. To the outside world, she is the perfect suburban housewife who organizes charity drives and serves aggressively on the HOA committee. But behind closed doors, she is a deeply toxic, narcissistic woman who thrives entirely on maintaining absolute control. My father, Arthur, is a chronic coward who consciously chose to keep his head down and avoid conflict rather than stand up to her tyranny. And then there is Julian. Julian was the golden child. From the exact moment he was born, he could do absolutely no wrong in Evelyn's eyes. I, on the exact opposite hand, was the designated scapegoat. I was expected to be flawless, highly responsible, and completely self-sufficient from a terrifyingly young age. When I finally met Qley, I genuinely thought I had found my life partner. I introduced her to my family. Looking back now with the painful clarity of hindsight, the warning signs were flashing neon red. Evelyn instantly attached herself to Qley, but not in a normal, welcoming way. Evelyn started intentionally, maliciously setting up situations for Qley and Julian to be entirely alone together. The most sickening piece of this entire puzzle fell into place in my memory. 2 years ago, there was a massive 3-day outdoor music festival. I had planned to take time off to take Qley, but a massive commercial project at my firm hit a critical deadline. I made the mistake of discussing this dilemma with my mother. Evelyn pulled me aside and told me to focus on my career, suggesting Julian drive Qley down there instead. I gave Julian $500 in cash for the gas and paid for their hotel room. I found out later that specific weekend, in the exact hotel room I paid for with my overtime money, was the very first time they slept together. My mother orchestrated the entire affair because she wanted her golden child to have everything he desired, even if it meant destroying my life. The morning after I kicked Qley out, my younger sister Maya called me. Maya had always been the quiet, anxious observer in our family dynamic. She called me, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Nolan, Qley is here. She is at Mom and Dad's house." I gripped the phone so hard the plastic casing actually creaked. Maya started crying softly. "She came here late last night. She told Mom everything." Mom hugged her, rubbed her back, and told her that true, authentic love cannot be denied. Mom helped her carry her suitcases upstairs. She moved her into Julian's room, your old bedroom. For the next several months, I went absolute strict, no contact with my parents and my brother. I focused obsessively on my job. But as the winter holidays rapidly approached, my mother started leaving voicemails on my work phone, demanding I attend our traditional Thanksgiving dinner to heal as a family. Against every single screaming alarm bell in my head, I decided to go. I thought maybe seeing the physical toll this had taken on me would snap them back to reality. I drove to their house on Thanksgiving afternoon. I pushed open the front door. The house was overwhelmingly warm, smelling of roasted turkey and cinnamon. I walked into the formal dining room, and the scene before me literally made my stomach violently turn over. Sitting right at the head of the long oak table, laughing loudly and holding hands in plain view of everyone, were Julian and Qley. Sitting right across from them were Qley's parents. The entire room went dead silent. Evelyn immediately stood up, completely unfazed. "Nolan, you made it!" she exclaimed, bright. Arthur immediately dropped his gaze to his napkin. I looked at Qley's parents, who gave me tight, pitying smiles. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Evelyn sighed dramatically. "Nolan, please do not make a scene on a holiday. Julian and Qley have formally announced their committed relationship. You need to be the bigger person here and support your brother." I did not scream. I realized in that exact crystal clear moment that these people were not my family. They were a toxic cult. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly. I turned around, walked out the front door, and let it slam shut behind me. I got into my truck and drove to a deserted McDonald's parking lot. Right there, under the flickering fluorescent light, I made a final absolute decision. I pulled out my cell phone and called my coworker Elias. "I need a massive favor tonight," I said. "I need to pack up my entire house. I need to be completely gone before the sun comes up." That night, Elias and I stripped my house down to the bare drywall. I threw anything Qley had left behind into heavy black contractor garbage bags and tossed them directly into a dumpster. The next morning, I withdrew every single penny from my accounts, canceled my phone contract, and permanently deleted all my social media. A week prior, my company's CEO had offered me a massive promotion to oversee a new, highly lucrative division in Miami, Florida. I called him and accepted the vice president position. Arriving in Miami felt exactly like stepping onto a different, much cleaner planet. There were absolutely no ghosts of my past haunting these streets. I threw myself entirely into my new role as VP of Regional Development at the real estate investment firm. My specific job was to identify struggling commercial properties and over-leveraged residential portfolios, acquire their massive debt from regional banks at a steep discount, and ruthlessly restructure or liquidate them. Within a year and a half, I had completely transformed my reality. I bought a sleek, modern penthouse apartment downtown as a physical symbol of my absolute financial independence. I walked into a high-end dealership and bought a midnight black $140,000 Audi R8 in cash. I was thriving professionally, but I was isolated. That is when I met Sarah. Sarah was a corporate consultant who worked in the high-rise building next to mine. We started dating, and one night I finally opened up to her about my dark past. I told her the entire ugly truth. I fully expected her to be disgusted. Instead, she got this strange, overly sympathetic look. "Nolan, they are still your family. Have you ever tried to just sit down and talk to your mother?" I immediately shut the conversation down, setting a firm boundary. But Sarah unfortunately suffered from a severe misguided savior complex. She secretly went through my home office desk, found my parents' Ohio address, and initiated secret contact with Evelyn. Evelyn immediately spun a massive web of lies, telling Sarah I was a deeply troubled man who misunderstood a complicated romantic situation. Then came the phone call that changed the trajectory of everything. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late October. My private cell phone vibrated. It was an unknown number from my hometown. I picked it up. Nolan, the voice on the other end, was trembling. It was my Aunt Beatrice, my mother's younger sister, and the only genuinely decent person in that bloodline. "Nolan, it is your mother," she sobbed hysterically. "She collapsed yesterday. They did scans. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 3 months to live. She is begging for you. She wants to apologize before she goes." The solid floor seemed to completely drop out from underneath me. No matter how monstrous a parent is, the sudden thought of them dying an agonizing death hits you like a runaway freight train. I didn't even go back to my apartment to pack a bag. I grabbed my wallet, ran to my Audi R8, drove to the airport, and bought a first-class ticket on the first available flight back to Ohio. The entire flight, I was in a state of suffocating emotional agony, mentally preparing myself to forgive her. I rented an SUV at the airport and drove straight to my parents' house. The driveway was packed with cars. I assumed the extended family was gathering for a somber vigil. I walked up to the heavy oak front door, took a deep, shuddering breath, and pushed it open. There was no mechanical hospital bed. There were no hissing oxygen tanks. Instead, the large living room was brightly decorated with silver and gold balloons. There was a massive catered buffet spread across the dining table. A huge, professionally printed banner hung across the brick fireplace that read, "Congratulations, Julian and Qley, on your engagement." And standing right in the center of the room, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, looking healthier and more radiant than she had in a decade, was my mother. She turned and saw me standing frozen in the doorway. She didn't look shocked or guilty. She smiled a triumphant, sickeningly sweet smile. "Nolan, you made it," she exclaimed loudly. "I knew you would come. We couldn't possibly celebrate your brother's beautiful engagement without you here." I stood absolutely paralyzed. I looked frantically around the room. Julian was standing near the fireplace wearing a custom-tailored navy blue suit. His arm was wrapped possessively around Qley, who was proudly flashing a massive diamond ring at her friends. It was the exact custom setting I had bookmarked 2 years ago. My father was standing by the kitchen, nervously adjusting his tie and refusing to make eye contact. "Aunt Beatrice," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "She called me. She said you had stage 4 pancreatic cancer." My mother waved her hand dismissively, letting out a light chuckle. "Oh, Nolan, you know exactly how dramatic your Aunt Beatrice can be. I had a benign, harmless cyst removed, but it made me realize how terribly short life is. When Sarah reached out, I knew we needed a strong incentive to finally get you in the same room as us. She had faked it. She had maliciously manipulated her own sister, faked terminal cancer, and weaponized my fundamental human empathy, just to trick me into attending my cheating brother's engagement party. She thought I would simply swallow my pride, put on a fake smile, and congratulate the brother who had slept with my fiancée in my own bed. For the first time in my entire life standing in that room, I did not feel a single shred of hurt. The intense burning anger completely evaporated, replaced by a sensation of absolute sub-zero clarity. I saw these people for exactly what they were. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying my heart rate. I adjusted my grip on the heavy leather handle of my briefcase. I had carried this briefcase onto the plane because the documents inside were more valuable than anything I owned. "You faked having terminal cancer," I stated. My voice was not loud, but the sheer lack of emotion made Evelyn blink rapidly. "You manipulated Aunt Beatrice into hysterical tears just to get me to attend an engagement party." Evelyn let out a short sigh. "Nolan, you are being incredibly dramatic. Julian has found his soulmate. You need to let go of this toxic resentment and be a supportive older brother." Julian decided to strut over, puffing out his chest. "Hey bro," he said using that exact disrespectful tone. "Glad you could make it. We're family, right? Blood is thicker than water." Qley finally met my eyes, a distinct glimmer of arrogance in her expression. She thought she was entirely untouchable. "Hello, Nolan," Qley said softly. "I hope you can find it in your heart to be happy for us." I looked at Julian, then at Qley, and finally at Evelyn. I felt a slow, dark smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a predator realizing the trap had perfectly snapped shut. "I am not here to be a supportive brother," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the soft music. "And I am certainly not here to celebrate a relationship built on 2 years of deceit." Evelyn's fake smile instantly vanished. "Nolan, stop this right now. I will not allow you to embarrass this family in front of our guests. You embarrassed this family the day you decided to reward infidelity." "Evelyn," I replied, deliberately using her first name. I saw my father flinch. The music continued to play, but the conversations rapidly died down. The tension was palpable. Julian stepped forward, his face flushing red. "This is my house. This is my engagement party. If you can't show basic respect, walk right back out that door." "Your house?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. I let out a genuine booming laugh. "Julian, you have never owned a single thing in your entire pathetic life. You are a 22-year-old unemployed man-child living in a bedroom funded entirely by a mother who is secretly drowning in massive debt to maintain the illusion of your success." Evelyn stepped forward, grabbing my forearm, her nails digging into my jacket. "Nolan, shut your mouth right now. Take your hand off me," I commanded, my voice carrying a level of icy authority that made her instantly release her grip. I walked past them, making my way to the large, polished mahogany dining table. I swept a large platter of appetizers to the side, ignoring the gasps from the guests, and firmly placed my leather briefcase squarely in the center of the table. I popped the brass latches. The sharp metallic click sounded like gunshots in the dead silent room. I opened the briefcase. I looked at Qley's father, Mr. Sterling, a wealthy local businessman. I looked at my father, and finally I looked at Evelyn, whose face had gone completely pale. "You invited me here today to witness your victory," I said, looking directly at my mother. "You thought you could use a fake cancer diagnosis to drag me back into your toxic web. But you made one critical, fatal miscalculation." I pulled a thick stack of legal documents from the briefcase and slammed them down onto the mahogany table. "You completely underestimated exactly what I've been doing for the last 2 years. While you were busy playing house, I was building an empire. And today I am going to show every single person in this room exactly how much your delusions actually cost." The entire room of 50 guests was entirely paralyzed. For those of you who do not know, I addressed the crowd, my voice projecting clearly. "I am the Vice President of Regional Development for a major real estate and debt acquisition firm based out of Miami. My specific corporate mandate is to identify struggling regional banks and acquire their toxic assets for immediate liquidation." I looked directly at Mr. Sterling. 3 months ago, my firm finalized a massive acquisition of distressed assets from the primary regional bank here in this county. As a managing partner, I personally reviewed the ledgers, and I found something incredibly fascinating. I picked up the top document. It was a certified, notarized summary of financial liabilities. "Arthur," I said, addressing my father. He flinched visibly. "When was the last time you actually looked at the financial statements for this house?" My father swallowed hard, his face a sickening shade of gray. "The house is paid off. We paid off the primary mortgage 5 years ago." "That is exactly what your wife told you," I replied brutally. I held the document up, but that is a complete categorical lie. Over the last 4 years, Evelyn has secretly taken out a massive secondary mortgage on this property. She forged your signature on the preliminary paperwork, utilized her power of attorney, and leveraged every single dime of equity this family possessed. The room collectively gasped. Arthur looked as if he had been physically struck. He turned slowly to look at Evelyn. "Evelyn," he whispered, shaking uncontrollably. "Tell me he is lying." Evelyn was hyperventilating, her chest heaving. She lunged forward, trying to grab the papers. "Give me those. You have no right to access my private financial records. This is illegal. It is perfectly legal, Evelyn, because my firm currently owns the debt. You are my debtor." I turned my attention back to the horrified crowd. She didn't just mortgage the house, she took out an $85,000 personal line of credit. She maxed out 6 different credit cards in Arthur's name. I pointed a firm finger directly at Julian, who was now standing frozen. The arrogant smirk wiped completely from his face. And where did all that money go? It went to him. It went to fund his failed DJ equipment. It went to pay off his DUI legal fees. It went to buy that ridiculously expensive $20,000 custom diamond ring on Qley's finger because Julian hasn't held a paying job in 3 years. Qley instinctively covered her ring, her face flushing a deep crimson. She looked at Julian with absolute terror. The comfortable lifestyle she thought she secured was rapidly dissolving. "Mr. Sterling?" I called out, addressing Qley's father directly. I slid a specific folder across the table toward him. He hesitated before opening it. "You pride yourself on your financial literacy. You are about to hand your daughter over to a man who is entirely insolvent. His mother has completely bankrupted this family. The man standing next to your daughter is a financial black hole, and the second this house goes under, they will be coming to you to fund their lifestyle." Mr. Sterling aggressively scanned the documents. His face transitioned from shock to pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed the folder shut and glared at Evelyn. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice booming. "You sat in my living room and told me you were setting up a trust fund for the wedding." Evelyn burst into tears. It was the raw, ugly panic of a narcissist finally cornered with undeniable empirical evidence. "I was going to fix it," she wailed, pulling at her hair. Julian's music was going to take off. "I did it for love. You did it to maintain control." I corrected her, my voice slicing through her sobs. "You sacrificed Dad's retirement, your home, and my mental health just to keep your golden child entirely dependent on you. Nolan, please." Julian suddenly begged, his voice cracking, shedding the tough guy persona entirely. "Bro, you can't do this. We can set up a payment plan. You're rich. You can just forgive the debt." For family, I looked at him with profound disgust. "Forgive the debt," I whispered dangerously. "You slept in my bed with the woman I was going to marry. You laughed about it. You replaced me at the Thanksgiving table. You showed zero remorse and zero loyalty. You are not my brother. You are a parasite." I turned to the rest of the room. As the majority stakeholder of the firm that holds this non-performing debt, and due to the fact that these accounts have been severely delinquent for over 120 days, I have already authorized the legal department to initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. The official eviction notices will be served by the county sheriff tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. Arthur collapsed into a dining chair, burying his face in his trembling hands, letting out a hollow groan. Evelyn shrieked a horrific guttural sound, dropping to her knees on the expensive hardwood floor. "You can't!" she screamed. "You cannot put your own mother on the street. You made your choice the day you moved Qley into my bedroom," I said coldly. I meticulously packed the documents back into my leather briefcase and snapped the latches shut. I looked at Qley. She was standing near her angry parents, tears streaming down her face, silently mouthing the word, "sorry." It was the most pathetic display I had ever witnessed. "I strongly suggest you all enjoy the catered buffet," I said to the silent crowd. "It is the last meal this house will ever serve." I turned my back on the chaos, walked at a measured pace toward the front door, and stepped out into the crisp evening air. Behind me, the room erupted into pandemonium. I could hear Mr. Sterling screaming at Julian. I walked down the driveway to my midnight black Audi R8, slid into the premium leather seat, and turned the ignition. The powerful engine roared to life. As I drove away, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror for the final time, I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt a massive, suffocating weight lift off my chest. I had legally and systematically dismantled the entire foundation of their toxic existence. The absolute destruction of my family's facade was spectacular and swift. True to my word, the sheriff arrived at exactly 8:00 the next morning. The bright orange foreclosure notices were stapled to the front door. My father Arthur finally snapped out of his cowardice-induced coma. The sheer magnitude of the financial ruin broke his subservience. He immediately hired an aggressive lawyer and filed for a highly contested divorce, claiming extreme financial abuse and citing the forged documents. He moved into a depressing one-bedroom apartment and sent me a long email begging for forgiveness and financial assistance. I read it once, felt absolutely nothing, and dragged it directly to the trash bin. Evelyn fought the foreclosure tooth and nail, representing herself because she had no money for an attorney. The judge ruled swiftly in my firm's favor. She was legally evicted, her credit score completely annihilated, and her reputation in the community shattered. Her wealthy friends completely abandoned her. Through updates from my sister Maya, who had finally grown a spine, moved out of state and started therapy. I learned my mother was forced to take a minimum wage job as a greeter at a massive big box store in the next county over. Julian and Qley's soulmate connection, unsurprisingly, could not survive the total absence of a funded bank account. The second the financial pipeline from Evelyn was severed, the romantic illusion completely disintegrated. Qley's wealthy parents immediately cut her off, refusing to pay her rent and demanding she return her leased car. About 8 months after the engagement party, Maya called me with a perfectly ironic update. Qley had cheated on Julian. She got caught sleeping with Zach, Julian's absolute best friend, who was supposed to be his best man, but that wasn't even the kicker. Qley was pregnant, and it was definitely Zach's kid. The sheer staggering hypocrisy was breathtaking. Julian completely lost his mind, showed up drunk to his warehouse job, smashed equipment, got fired, and faced another massive legal battle. He ended up living in a damp, unfinished basement in Evelyn's new crappy rental apartment, drinking cheap beer all day. Qley's teaching career also went up in flames once the scandalous details circulated through the local school districts. She was deemed a massive liability and ended up working at a low-level call center, living with Zach in a cramped apartment. About a year after the confrontation, my firm secured a highly lucrative contract to completely demolish and rebuild a large section of foreclosed residential properties for a major gentrification project. The list of properties included my childhood home. I personally volunteered to oversee the initial demolition phase. I flew back to Ohio, drove my Audi R8 to the neighborhood, and parked across the street. I stood there in a tailored suit holding a cup of hot coffee and gave the foreman the official signal. I watched as the massive yellow excavator raised its hydraulic arm and smashed directly through the roof of my old bedroom, the exact room where my life had fallen apart. I watched the heavy machinery tear down the brick walls and rip the pristine oak dining room to shreds. The physical structure that had housed decades of psychological abuse and deceit was systematically reduced to a pile of worthless rubble. Halfway through the demolition, a beat-up sedan pulled up. Evelyn stepped out. Someone must have tipped her off. She stood at the edge of the police barricade wearing a cheap, faded uniform vest, looking incredibly old and utterly broken. She watched the excavator crush the front porch. She didn't scream or cry. She just stood there completely hollowed out, watching her manufactured legacy turn to dust. I didn't walk over to her. I finished my coffee, got into my car, and drove directly to the airport. The purge was officially complete. I am sitting in my home office right now, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows at the sprawling Miami skyline. It has been over 3 years since I walked out of that horrific engagement party. I have learned a profound, life-altering lesson about boundaries. Society heavily conditions us to believe that family is an unconditional bond, that blood is thicker than water. That narrative is a complete, absolute lie designed to keep victims trapped in cycles of abuse. I learned that a boundary is not an aggressive wall you build to punish people. It is a necessary, impenetrable gate you construct to keep your own soul safe. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your boundaries. I have built a life now that feels incredibly authentic, grounded, and secure. I met a woman named Elena. Elena is an accomplished cardiologist. She is strong, fiercely independent, and possesses an unbreakable moral compass. She respects boundaries because she understands the absolute necessity of them. When she found out she was pregnant with our first child, Evelyn somehow caught wind of the news through social media stalking. Evelyn sent a box of my old baby clothes to our house with a long, manipulative letter about forgiveness and a child needing their grandmother. Elena didn't even ask me what to do. She opened the box, read the first line of the letter, marched outside, and threw the entire package directly into the trash bin. Then she blocked every single account associated with my hometown. That is what a real partnership looks like. I do not live in a house heavily leveraged by lies and secret mortgages. I wake up, go to a job that fulfills me, surround myself exclusively with people who value me, and go to sleep every single night with an entirely clear conscience. I did not lose a family. I actively amputated a gangrenous limb, and in doing so, I saved my own life. There is profound freedom in knowing you possess the absolute power to walk away from anything that is not true. You always unconditionally have the power to say no, to close the door, and to start completely over. The absolute best revenge is not the dramatic destruction of your enemies. It is the quiet, undeniable construction of your own massive happiness.